Hi, sweethearts. Today on Stories for Kids, I'm telling the story of Rose Red and Snow White. A poor widow once lived in a cottage. In front of the cottage was a garden in which were growing 2 rose trees. One bore white roses that shone in the sunlight, and the other bore red roses that glowed in the evening sun. She had 2 children who resembled these rose trees. One was called Snow White, and she had pale blonde hair and light blue eyes. The other was called Rose Red, and she had rich red hair and bright green eyes. They were as lovely and busy and untiring as any 2 children ever were. Snow White was more gentle and quieter than her sister. She liked to sew and read and clean the house. Rose Red, on the other hand, liked skipping through the fields, looking for flowers and trying to catch summer birds. They grew into lovely young women who worked hard, and they helped everyone they could. Now, one evening, as they were all sitting cozily together, there was a knock at the door as if someone wished to come in. "Make haste, Rose Red," said her mother. "Open the door. It surely must be some traveler seeking shelter." Rose Red pulled back the bolt, expecting to see some poor man, but it was nothing of the kind. It was a bear that had thrust his big black head in the open door. Rose Red cried out and sprang back, but the bear began to speak, and he said, "Do not be afraid. I will not do you any harm. I am half frozen and would like to warm myself a little at your fire." The mother replied, "Oh, poor bear, come in and lie by the fire. Only be careful that your hair is not burnt." "Ladies," begged the bear, "please knock some of the snow off my coat." So they brought the broom and brushed the bear's coat quite clean, and he stretched himself out in front of the fire, pleased himself by growling a little, only to show that he was happy and comfortable. Before long, they were quite good friends. After this, every evening at the same time, the bear would come to the cottage and lay by the fire. One morning, the bear said to Snow White, "Now I must leave you, and all summer long I shall not be able to come back." Snow White asked, "Where are you going, dear bear?" The bear told the girls about the bad dwarfs of the woods that stole his treasure, and so he had to go protect it. "Now that the sunshine has thawed the earth," said the bear, "whatever gets into the dwarfs' hands or is brought to their caves never sees the daylight again." So one day, the mother sent her daughters to the woods to get firewood. They heard a cry, and they saw a dwarf with a shriveled up face and a snow-white beard about 2 feet long. The beard was caught in a tree trunk, and the tiny fellow was hopping to and fro, but he could not manage to free himself. He stared at the children with his red, fiery eyes and called out, "Why are you standing there? Can't you come try and help me?" "Well, what were you doing, little fella?" replied Rose Red. "I meant to split the tree trunk so I could chop it up for kitchen sticks, but it caught my handsome white beard, and I cannot set myself free." In spite of the dwarf's bad temper, the girls tried everything to release the little man, but without success. The beard was still stuck. "I can run and get someone else," said Rose Red. Snow White said, "Oh, let me think." Then she clapped her hands, took out her scissors, and in a moment set the dwarf free by cutting off the end of his beard. Immediately, the dwarf fell back and said, "You clumsy creatures, you're horrible. You cut off a bit of my beautiful beard." Saying this, he swung the sack across his shoulder and walked off into the woods. Not long afterwards, the 2 girls were sent to the brook to catch fish for dinner. As they were drawing near the water, they perceived something that looked like a large grasshopper springing towards the stream as if it were going in. They hurried up to see what it might be, and they found that it was that same dwarf. "Where are you going?" said Rose Red. "Don't you see that wretch of a fish is trying to pull me in?" sputtered the dwarf. The girls caught him just in time. They got a hold of him firmly and tried to untangle his beard from the fishing line, but they were too tightly snarled together. There's no other choice but to use the scissors again, so the dwarf lost another little piece of his beard. The dwarf exclaimed in a great rage, "This is how you damage my beard!" Then he fetched a sack of pearls that lay among the rushes, and not saying another word, he hobbled off and disappeared behind a large stone. Soon after that day, it chanced that the poor widow sent her daughters to town to purchase material, needles, ribbon, and tape. As they walked toward the town, a heart-rending cry reached their ears, and running quickly to the place, they saw with horror that an eagle had seized the same dwarf they had rescued before and was about to carry him off. The kind children did not hesitate for an instant. They took a firm hold of the little man and wrestled with the eagle until it let the dwarf go and took flight. A small, squeaky, cracked voice was heard saying, "Couldn't you have held me more gently? See my little coat? You've torn it." Then he picked up the chest of jewels and slipped out of sight behind a piece of rock. The maidens by this time were quite used to his ungrateful ways, so they took no notice of it, but went on their way and made their purchases and started back to their happy home. On their way back to the house, suddenly, once more, they ran across their dwarf friend, counting his jewels and laughing excitedly. When he saw the two girls, he turned red with rage and said, "What are you standing there for, making ugly faces?" Suddenly a growl was heard nearby, and the large black bear joined the party. Up jumped the dwarf, and he cried out, "Oh, dear Mr. Bear, forgive me, I pray. I'll give you all my treasure. What would you do with such an unimportant little fellow? Did you see those two young women? I beg of you, sir, take them and let me go." But the bear would not be moved by his speeches. He gave the wicked little creature a blow with his paw, and he lay lifeless on the ground. Suddenly the bear's skin slipped to the ground, and there before them stood a handsome man dressed in gold, who said, "I am a king's son who was enchanted by this wicked dwarf lying here. He stole my treasure and turned me into a big bear and would only free me once he was dead. Therefore he has received fair punishment." The prince continued to visit Snow White and Rose Red and introduced them to his brother. And when they were grown, Snow White married the prince, and Rose Red married his brother. And together they shared between them the enormous treasure that the dwarf had collected in his cave. The two girls' mother came to the castle to live with them, and she brought her roses. They were planted on either side of the castle gates and still bloom there to this day. And that is the story of Snow White and Rose Red. Thanks for listening, sweethearts. That's it for Stories for Kids. Come back next week for my next story. Bye-bye.